Hey, you again! You're probably back looking for more information on WIDA ELD standards framework and how they tie into assessment, aren't you? You came to the right place. You came to see WIDA Woman. Well, welcome back. Let's see. Last we spoke, I had just described the ELD standards frameworks and promised to then provide more information on the performance levels as well as their implications on ELL students. Is that right? Let's do it! Well, we discussed the 5 standards and the fact that they connect to various state standards such as the Common Core and the Next Generation Science standards. Well, based on these standards, WIDA has created a couple of assessments. One called the WAT, which is used as a screener test of sorts for new ELL students enrolling in school to see where they should be placed. WIDA also created something called the ACCESS test, which is given annually to ELL students to see how they're progressing. According to WIDA, the test is carefully crafted to be representative of the social and academic language demands within a school setting, as is exemplified in their ELD standards. Each question, in fact, is based on an MPI from the ELD standards. Remember, we talked about MPIs. Those are the model performance indicators. And once these are taken, mainstream teachers are given the results. By law, states are required to report the progress of their ELL students annually, per No Child Left Behind. Now, the ACCESS test satisfies this perfectly. Data from the ACCESS test is helpful in determining ELL's placement in the mainstream classroom. Also, it's useful for school districts to see if their program is working effectively. Also used for mainstream teachers to understand where their children are with their language and to inform their instruction, as well as to help them create fair assessments. This way, ELLs won't be unfairly graded based on their language skills, but rather their content mastery. The ACCESS test also helps identify ELP levels in relation to the WIDA ELD standard performance definitions. We'll discuss those here in a second. Each form assesses the 4 language domains as discussed in the previous video: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So, you're a mainstream teacher who has an ELL student in his or her class, and now you've just gotten their ACCESS test scores from your ESL teacher. What now? Well, let's discuss the scores. This would be easier to do if I had those available for me somewhere around here. Ah, there we go. Scores are given as raw scores, scale scores, and English language proficiency scores. Raw scores are reported for comprehension, speaking, and writing. Scale scores and proficiency levels are reported for the 4 language domains: listening, speaking, reading, writing, and 4 different combinations of language domains. These combinations include oral language, literacy, comprehension, and overall or composite score, which is a combination of all the 4 language domains. Scale scores can be used to monitor a student's growth over time within, but not across, a language domain. On the right, you see the student's scores that indicate their proficiency level based on a scale of 1 through 6 for each language domain. As you can see, there are also additional domains that serve as the combinations. The proficiency level scores are interpretive scores. They describe student performance in terms of the 6 WIDA language proficiency levels. That's right, it's time! 1, entering. 2, emerging. 3, developing. 4, expanding. 5, bridging. 6, reaching. Also provided is the student's composite score, seen here. Above the composite score are the scale composite scores, which basically average the scores of oral language, literacy, and so on. But beware of the composite score, however, as it's an average more or less of all of the domains. So, even though a student could potentially score high in one domain, it can inflate the entire composite score and completely misrepresent the student's actual capabilities. So, now you have your student's ACCESS score. What are you going to do with it? Well, first you have to understand the performance definitions as provided in the frameworks. As I mentioned in the first video, the WIDA Standards Framework provides performance definitions to describe the various levels of language proficiency and what students at each level ought to know and ought to be able to do with academic language in the mainstream classroom. These go from, as I mentioned, entering, all the way to reaching. So, a mainstream teacher can look at a student's score in each language domain and use this to inform their instruction. So, mainstream teachers can take these scores and look at something WIDA has provided called the Can Do Descriptors to inform their instruction, creation of tasks, and assessments that are appropriate to the capabilities of their ELL students. This will make assessments and activities fair for the ELL students in the sense that the information used from the access test can be considered part of their prior knowledge, and integrating that into activities and assessments gives them a leg up on it. Knowing what a student should be able to do with academic language will better prepare teachers to assess and gauge their students' mastery of content knowledge without the issue of language blurring the lines. Let's say you have a first grade student who scored a 1 in listening on his or her access test. Looking at the Can Do descriptor provided here, a mainstream teacher can take the info provided in the descriptor and design activities and assessments that fairly incorporate the student's listening skills as well as the other skills depending on the scores provided. And WIDA goes so far as to also give mainstream teachers can-do descriptors that are specific to the ELD standard areas. You remember, we discussed these! Social and instructional language, language of language arts, language of mathematics, language of science, and of course, language of social studies. Here's an example for science. We can use the same example of a first grader who scored a 1 on his or her listening. According to this descriptor, a teacher can determine what this student can do, for example, in the domain of listening, with the example topic of force and motion. It wouldn't be fair, for example, to expect this student to perform as a first grader who scored a 5 in listening and have him or her play effects of force on motion through gestures or demonstration based on oral scenarios, as his or her test scores indicated that he or she simply cannot do that yet. What he or she can do, however, is explore movement of real-life objects by following oral commands and modeling. Creating tasks and assessments with the access test scores as well as with the can-do descriptors in mind can help assure mainstream teachers are developing tasks and assessments that are fair and valid, and that these tasks and assessments are asking their students to use academic language at levels at which they are proven to be proficient. If you are interested in obtaining copies of the Standards Framework or the Can Do Descriptors, I recommend getting in touch with your school's ESL teacher and/or visiting WIDA.US, where they are available for download as well as purchase. Bye-bye.